Good evening. Today is Tuesday, February 27th, and this is the work-study special meeting of the Cave Creek Unified School District, number 93. It is 6 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 1.3, roll call. Members of the cabinet that are present are Mrs. Rodriguez, Dr. Hendrickson, and Dr. Jensen, and of course, Mr. Dolezal. And all members of the board are present. Item 1.4, formal adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Any amendments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Any
opposed? Okay. Item 2.1, call to the public. We have none. All right. Item 3.1, the 2023-24 demographic report presented by Mrs. Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you, Madam President and members of the board. So this evening we have a couple of guests with us. We have Rick Brammer and Don Graves. They are with Applied Economics. Rick was presented to the board a few months ago. Just kind of gave you some preliminary, very high level. Here's what's kind of going on in the world of school enrollment and demographics. He since has gone out and done extensive research about our district and about some of the things that are going to impact our district in the near future. You have a full copy of the report in your board packet, but I've asked Mr. Bremer and Mr. Graves to come and give you kind of a synopsis and summary of what is in the report, and then also give you an opportunity to ask some questions if you have any. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bremer.
Thank you. President Busby, Vice President Brown, members of the board, Dr. Dolezal, did I just promote you?
You did.
Oh, well, consider it a battlefield promotion and ticket. So anyways, it's our pleasure to be here tonight. I'm here with Don Graves to give you a little bit of an update on our demographic report. We tried to slim the PowerPoint down so we didn't have too awful many slides to look at, but we do want to at least hit some of the high points, and it's good to see a lot of familiar faces, that's for sure. The scope of our study has been pretty much the same for years, where we're analyzing all the enrollment data we can get, not only from you, but from alternative providers, around the district and just outside the district. A look at the demographic characteristics of the population, because we're obviously at a place where the amount of new construction that we're having occur isn't really impacting population, at least not school-age population, hardly at all. So we're really looking at what's happening at the demographic characteristics of who's already here. The aging, the owner versus renter, and of course when Don gets into looking at housing, really looking at what housing prices are doing to us, and then feeding that back to me and figuring out what that means in terms of demographics, because right now that's a big factor here in this district. Don Graves with our office is our residential development expert. He's the one who does the land inventories, talks to the developers, the builders, and the state lands department, tries to figure out what's going to happen in your future coming down the road. And then we do two models. We do a macroeconomic top-down, how does your district fit into the Northeast Valley, into Phoenix, the general mega growth trends. And then the more important one, I think, is the bottom up, where we use you got a map on the wall too, where we're looking at the enrollment in the district a square mile or less at a time. And it's really a pleasure that we've been able to serve you for so long, because we have an incredible time series of data. We know how many students you've served out of each one of these red squared areas going back 20 years. And that really helps us in doing our projections. It also is a little depressing in some ways, but it does give us a nice solid base of information that's independent to what schools were open, what boundaries were open. It's apples to apples, all through time. So we'll start out looking at trends in total enrollment. And the blue bars in this case are 40th day head count, K-12. So it's not, some of the other measurements, ADM or something like that. This is who is actually enrolled in the district on the 40th day of every year. And so, we have a story here that goes back into the 2000s when there were still, some more commercial residential developments going, some more standard product. The district went through a pretty good boom up through the start of the Great Recession, and then only a minor really decline, in the later 2000s from the recession. Pretty stable community. And then you get the slow dip after that, which basically comes from the evolution and the expansion of charter schools. And so that brought us down for a few years to a point. But if you see, if you look at from 2010 over to 2019, there's a little bit of a dip, but essentially there's a whole lot of stability in that particular range too. And then along came COVID, and we all know what that did and the big dip that it created. The interesting thing about it is for us, because we serve so many districts, is that you're one of the more affluent areas, and guess what? People didn't come back. If you go to a lower socioeconomic status district, most of the kids came back the following year. And if you're middle of the road, about half came back. And you joined one of the unfortunate few, it serves an affluent area where people essentially found acceptable alternatives. Whether that was hiring a teacher for a group of you and 10 of your friends, or if it was finding space at a charter school or a private school, that's what you did. Homeschooling is way up. I'm still waiting to see data. That data is so lagged, but I know that that's happening. All the tools that were created to help us get through COVID makes it a lot easier to do homeschooling too, or a K-12 type version of that particular program. So that explains the 2021 school year. Then we had a year pretty much unchanged, and then the last 2 years down big again. I think the decline totals around 600 students in the last 2 years. So what's happened in the last 2 years? Well, there's not a direct connection, and I'm not claiming there is one, but the enrollment savings accounts, the ESA program, in the 21-22 school year, there were 94 students in the district who were receiving ESAs. That's 21-22. In 22-23, there were 441, an increase of 347. This year, there's 918, which is an increase of 477. So they've actually picked up 824 vouchers in the last 2 years. Now, we know, especially the first year, a lot of the students who took vouchers were already in a private school. So it wasn't really impacting your enrollment one-to-one. In fact, it was less than half. That changed this year. A lot more of them now are new into the private school world. And so it's an unfortunate place to be, making projections in something where the biggest thing that's impacting us is out of our control and completely external and completely alien in a way to what Don and I do. I talk about the population who lives here, and he talks about the houses, but the whole thing with choice, whether you think like it or not, it takes the scientificness out of our work, because it comes down to individual choice. And, I felt like we went through this with charters, and we finally got to an equilibrium where we had the charters people wanted. They generally were locating in more of the growth areas rather than in existing communities. And now comes along this program. And it just, again, kind of kicks us, in the gut. And the worst thing about this is I don't know where the bottom is. I'm guessing, my theory is that the vast majority of the people that are going to participate are going to get in last year, this year, maybe next year. There's a limit to how many people, even with an ESA, can afford to send their child to a private school, which even at the elementary level is going to run you $14,000 to $20,000 a year. So your ESA is paying a little more than half of that bill. So it enables a certain group, to make that leap. But it certainly isn't going to make everybody make that leap. All right. So the next thing we look at is, the distribution of enrollment by grade cohort. And so average enrollment per grade in each of these groups, so K2, 3, 5, et cetera. So you can see K2 took a big hit. Those, from the 2010 on through there for a period, because that's where charter schools hit, and that's the group that they targeted. And then they grew their enrollment from that. So it took the big dive first, and the other ones followed. If you kind of see how those stair step across, it hits K2 first, then 3, 5, then 6, 8, and of course, most recently, it's impacting our enrollment at the high school level. And the spread between these is getting wider and wider because charter schools take more younger than they do older. It's hard to compete with a full-service high school, but they have a very high capture in the K8 group, and especially in the K2 group. Part of it is birth rates. There are fewer kids, fewer little ones out there. And the other part of it for you guys is simply housing affordability. People who are able to come in with a student, they're probably not coming in with 5-year-olds. Some of them are, obviously, but you don't afford this kind of a house, most of us, until you're a little bit further down the road in your career. So, again, kind of downward pressure. We talked about the alternative providers out there. You can see that there's only 2, and this year they actually took a big hit. Their enrollment went down by 200 students. So they are also getting hit by ESAs, just like you are. So some of the growth in ESAs came at your expense, but some of it also came at the charter's expense. Dawn does our development work. I'm just going to go through this real quick, and if you have questions, but things are still being built. There's been over 6,000 housing units added in the last 10 years. Production levels have actually been up, well, not so much last year, but the years immediately before. A lot of nice houses being built. But you can see it's scattered. All the blue dots show where those permits are, and other than a couple of projects, real developments in the southeast corner there of the district, it's all scattered hither and yon, in small developments or even individual lots, which makes Don's job a lot harder because it's easy to track what's going on in a big subdivision. It's hard to track what's going on when the dot map looks like this one. But we do know from the colored the areas you see colored in various yellows, those are indicating timing of when residential development might occur. Most of the ones that are occurring now are obscured by blue dots, but the lighter colored means it's further out in the future. But altogether, it adds up to about 14,000 additional housing units. As Dawn points out, 80% of those are either scattered or in that one area along Pima Road, which is a state land parcel that you all know, this big chunk of land right here, which is owned by state land. We do know that there's a firm that's interested in it, and they're asking the state to bring it to auction. And that'll take about a year at least to come to auction, and then assuming it sells, then you've got to plan it, you've got to do infrastructure, so you're 4 or 5 years out from any houses. But the fact of the matter is, it's been sitting a long time, and now it looks like it's inching at least towards development. Now, we're going to be starting 800,000 minimum, going into the millions. So again, I don't know how many kids, we do know it, we have a guess how many kids we're going to get out of that area, but it's not going to be a lot, and they're not going to be little. So we're thinking about 4,200 units or so, 4,300 units get built over the next 10 years. That'll create about 3,260 households, occupied housing units. And I stratify those by age group in order to translate households into school-aged population. And when you see the numbers for households and school-aged population, the 2000, 2010, and 2020 numbers are census. and then I'm interpolating in between because I like to follow the curve. But I know that those numbers are actual census numbers. And if you go back to the year, 2000, overall, the school-age population was 5447. That's persons aged 5 to 17 living in the district, whether they go to your school or any school at all. Okay, your enrollment that year was totaled 4398, 87 from outside. That means you had 4311 of your own students, which means you had a service rate of about 80%, 79.1%. So of the kids in your district, you were serving 80%. By 2010, that had dropped to 64%. And by 2020, it's at 58%. And then what's bothering us, of course, is that the enrollment, the school-age population, you can see, is dropping, but it's not, it's not dropping to zero. I mean, it's going down, but it's not going down nearly as fast as what the enrollment is, especially the last few years. And so we know the school-age population is shrinking, however, but even taking that into account, with the drops over the last 2 years, we're at barely more than half of the school-aged persons living in the district attending a district school. And this is just a graphic showing of what that looks like, where the school-age population is in green and the in-district enrollment is the blue bars, and the line is the ratio between the two. And it's a lousy relationship. You can see that purple line went flat. That's what we want to see. We want to see it flat or increasing. And it did that for us, for years, from 2010 to 2019. It's just been COVID and then what's happened since then that have really put us on a different track than we were just a few years ago. So we're projecting enrollment down by 147 for next year, altogether down by 600 or 700 probably over the next 10 years. Good part of that drop will be at the elementary level. If we get anything offsetting that, it's going to be, again, older kids. We do the projections by school. We're not going to sit and read individual numbers tonight. Everything in green, though, for your reference, is actual enrollment numbers. You can compare those periods, kind of apples to apples. So, from 2013 to 2018, we had a net change of 27 students in the whole district. And between 18 and 23, the last 5 years, we're down 1,100. So, and most of that we know is just, or at least half is just the last couple of years. And we can only speculate that that's due to ESAs. Unfortunately, the losses we're seeing in the next few years in the elementary, the 351, will get up to the middle schools in the following period. And high school enrollment is probably where it's going to take, the biggest hit in the near term, because you saw how those curves were shaping. So, unfortunately, enrollment is probably going to decrease over the next 10 years, driven by both, a smaller school-age population and by the change in the service rate. And the service rate thing is the one that it can go up or down. We kind of goes down, but it can go up too. And that's important to keep in the back of our minds, that those kids are still out there. And it's also important to make sure that we serve the ones who are here and not worry about the ones who aren't. At least that's my personal opinion. The progression of the lower enrollment at the lower levels is obviously now impacting the high school enrollment at a lesser rate because people move in with high schoolers. The amount of residential development potential is relatively small, but it's more the fact that the prices are so high. I think the average resale price in the district right now is about $1.2 million is the average resale. I think there's a few new homes you can buy, 700,000, is that right? Averaging $1.5 million. So there's a few new ones you can buy, 700,000 or 800,000, but everything else is well over $1 million. So it just doesn't say young families. And sadly, you might have to consider, some kind of facility changes or something needed so that you can continue to provide the program that you want to provide. And I'm not going to set policy, obviously, but I do see when schools, begin to drop below, if we get to the point where they're dropping below 350, 300 students, you really got to wonder if that's kind of a sustainable number. So I wish I had better news. I really do. We have a great community and great schools. It's just so frustrating. I can't imagine how frustrating it is for you. So we'd be happy to take any questions.
I'm just curious if roughly across the board, is what's happening in our district similar to other districts around the valley? I realize we're in a slightly different with the pricing, our housing pricing, but I'm just wondering if you kind of, laid it over the top of some others. Is it, I know enrollments, school-age children is going down in general, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, almost every district we work for has a similar decline. One of the things about you all is that it's always been an affluent area, and particularly at the high school level, there's always been a fair share of the population that's choosing private schools. So in some ways, you started at a lower level, and so now you're at a slightly lower level than some of the districts we work for, but it's because you started at a lower point. I would say that the rate of decline has been very similar. And Paradise Valley is only 63% or something like that. So it's not like you're way off the curve, unfortunately.
I think I remember reading in your report that you were able to get some pretty decent and accurate numbers from charter schools, but the private schools, since they don't have to report as much and they're maybe not very well forthcoming, we don't really know exactly who is all going to the private schools, but you could pretty much say that that's where these 919 families have gone, correct?
Correct. Some of them were in charter school, were in private school prior to the program.
Right.
So it hasn't all been at your expense, but what you said is correct.
Yeah. And you mentioned you don't have the data for homeschooling yet.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
On your residential development, there's projected two large housing developments just to the south of us. They're at Cave Creek Road and Sonoran Parkway, and then just a little farther south on Cave Creek Road, south of the Cave Buttes Dam. Did you get any timeline or any information back from those two? I know they've cleared the land there at south of Cave Buttes, but looks like they're just starting to do some stake or grading work there on Sonoran Parkway.
That's outside the district.
Just right on our border, yeah.
It's a couple, 3 miles, and Paradise Valley's licking their chops over those kids, too. So they are going to start. What do you know about it?
It's a D.R. Horton project, so those are going to be lower price houses, and they'll be built at a pretty faster rate. They tend to be a high volume builder. I'm not exactly sure when they're going to start, but it probably won't be long. I think it was about a year ago they had finished the auction, and they were just starting.
They're just starting to grade.
Starting to grade. So I remember I was out there while they were putting up a sign. There was raw desert except for one truck that was doing so. And they will move pretty fast, and those will be lower price houses, or at least comparatively speaking, those will be lower price houses from that builder.
I know they're across our border, but actually within minutes to Horseshoe Trails and Sonoran Trails Middle School. So we hope that maybe we will be able to pull some students up.
Yeah, no, it's definitely possible. I would send a mailer out to every new address that comes online.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I do appreciate it. Appreciate it.
All right, item 3.2, financial presentation, budget reduction, presented by Mrs. Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you, Madam President and members of the board. So this presentation is been anticipated for a while. I have been talking about that we've been looking at possible reductions. We know that we have a projected $2.5 million shortfall for next year based on our preliminary projections. Have shared all of this with you. So tonight we're going to unveil what we are proposing as the solution, but understanding that it's not a long-term plan. So we're going to talk about a few things that we're also entertaining for future planning. So all of us know enrollment is down. Now, I'm projecting enrollment to decline a little bit more aggressively than Mr. Bremer did. He's at 147. I'm at 200. And just the very simple math, and we've had this conversation, I'm looking at, we are not getting the number of kindergarten students in as high school seniors are graduating. Very simple. Don't see a whole lot of people moving into the district. Housing market is kind of stagnant right now. And so this is what we're going to project. I think that it may be a little more aggressive than what we'll actually experience. The problem is that we are on real-time funding. So in the good old days, I used to be able to budget fairly accurately because it was based on this year's 100th day is what we would get funded on next year. We don't have that luxury anymore. We actually get funded on the kids that come next year. So we have to be very conscious of what that looks like, because whatever we put in the budget, whatever we set for staffing levels, whatever we put in place for new expenditures, if those kids don't come, then you're talking about doing cuts in the middle of a year. Y'all experienced that before I came here, and it was not a pleasant activity to have to go through. We want to avoid that. So we want to make sure that whatever we do is going to at least sustain us for the lower enrollments that we project. The other thing that happens, and I'm watching this, and you'll see this in your finance reports when you look at fund balance reports, is that when we project enrollment to be higher than it actually is, you're offsetting a tax rate. And that generates revenue. Right now, if you look at our financial reports, you've got this discrepancy between what our budget capacity carryover is and the cash we have in the bank. So we want to minimize generating too much taxes, because that is going to be a problem. We have money in the bank we can't spend. That's a problem. So I say we estimate that we are going to decline further than we actually may. Keep our fingers crossed. And then that way we will be able to increase it. You can always increase your budget. And but we do right now have a projection of losing 200 kids. And what that does to the budget is it decreases it. And then overall, what you're going to see then, and you've seen the number of that 2.5 million. Now, our budget capacity is not going down 2.5 million. That's not the 200 kids. What's happened is we have had ESSER money to cover expenses. So as our budget has been declining, this year it declined. What covered it? Carry forward. Because we had money left over because we spent ESSER money on some of the salaries. Now those salaries are going to have to go back into M&O. And if we do put them back in M&O, you're going to have $2.5 million in a deficit. So here's our solution. We have an excess balance in Classroom Site Fund. Several years ago, Classroom Site Fund was rewritten to include support services. Support services include our counselors and our social workers. Okay? Classroom Site Fund also funds professional development. Professional development is our coaches. So those positions were funded out of ESSER. So we're recommending they get moved into Classroom Site Fund, not back into M&O. If we didn't do that, we would have to talk about eliminating more positions than we currently are recommending. We're transferring some of our special education paraprofessionals into our MIPS money. MIPS money is a fund that we get when we deliver services to our special needs students, such as speech therapy, daily care for them. Some of our kids are very fragile, and we have to do things like feeding and diapering and things like that. That care we get reimbursed for. Transportation for some of these students we get reimbursed for. So that fund builds at about $300,000 a year. We have about $1.1 million in that cash balance for that fund. We typically use this for special education related types of activities. Now the interesting thing, and I found this was fascinating, so the people who actually get the reimbursements for the MIPS money, I can't fund out of federal programs. I can't fund them out of MIPS. It won't allow us to. It's the craziest thing. I'm like, but they're the ones that are generating why. It doesn't make sense to me, but that's the rule that we have to play by. Okay? So what we have identified is there are special education paraprofessionals who don't file claims, who don't get reimbursement because they don't deliver the types of services that qualify for reimbursement. Maybe they're in a resource room or they're in a room that doesn't have students that qualify for reimbursement. So we've identified those paraprofessionals, and that's who we're going to fund out of the MIPS money. Now, then, so that's kind of half of the 2.5 that you see. The other is coming from eliminating positions. So we're restructuring our exceptional student support services. We've identified some positions that will be eliminated. And then we are going to, because of our declining enrollment, the governing board has established recommended classroom size, right? So much for, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but say, 25 students for second and third grade classrooms. So what we've looked at, is that good, Patty? Higher than that, 27? So we look at how many students the governing board is recommending for each grade level. And we said there will be a certain amount of teachers that will be eliminated because we don't have the students to maximize our class sizes. So that represents about 15 teaching positions. So having said all of that, we've got to the 2.5. So what you will see is we have the transferring of expenditures to other funds, and then we have eliminating positions. When we look at the sustainability of the positions that we have transferred to the other funds, what I look at is project that out for 5 years. Okay? Can we continue to fund those positions for the next 5 years? The answer would be yes, according to my projections. Now, having said that, we all know that funding formulas change in the state of Arizona all the time. So as long as we get the same amount of classroom site fund per student and we get the same amount of reimbursement through our Medicaid program, then yes, that's sustainable for the next 5 years. Okay? But we know we have to plan for declining enrollment, I think, more so than what may be in the demographer's report right now. Just because we, as Rick said, we don't know that unknown of parent choice. I don't know if parents really know about empowerment scholarships, if they choose to use empowerment scholarships and go outside the district. So we have put some opportunities together to collect information, okay? So we know that as a cabinet, we don't have all the ideas, but we know if we include all of our partners, such as our district leadership, which is all of our directors and our principals, and our community stakeholders, which Superintendent Dozel has community. It is a superintendent community council, and we've met with both of them. We did some brainstorming. We are committed to be fiscally responsible, along with enhancing the educational environment and experience for our kids, okay? But we have to move away from short-term fixes. And I feel like that's kind of what we've been doing in this district, well, at least from my perspective coming in, okay? And when I put this information together, we as a cabinet decided that the criteria for next year was going to be what you just saw for the 2.5. We know that that is not going to be something that is going to keep this district sustainable for the long term. So here's some of the ideas. Now, I want to preface this with, these are ideas that came from these different stakeholder groups, okay? These are not our recommendations. We are not prepared to do any recommendations to you tonight for the future. This is just about what we're going to do next year, because some of these ideas that are on this list are going to require more extensive research, okay? We don't want to do knee-jerk reactions and do quick, let's just get this done, without thoroughly doing our research on how this impacts kids. What have other districts done? What do we see is in the best interest of our community? Because just because other communities have done it doesn't mean that it's in best interest of the community here, okay? But until we do these focus groups and gather information, we are not going to be prepared to thoughtfully put in place and implement some of these things. We all know that making decisions, if you haven't thought through them, have unintended consequences. And we want to identify what the consequences may be so that we can mitigate any results of those. So, having said that, here's what leadership came up with. And this is just a kind of a high level. There's a whole list of sub things that are underneath these. I just tried to group them all into larger categories, but modifying the school calendar, transportation, staffing efficiency, preschool restructuring, private placement program transition, repurposing our buildings, program evaluation, increasing revenue sources, and then community engagement and marketing. Okay? So that was the leadership. Now here's our community. Recruiting, increasing enrollment, kind of the marketing side, right? Implementing a 4-day week for school. That's kind of the calendar side of the leadership. So you can kind of see some common threads through theirs. Hybrid models for specialized populations, increasing the MIPS reimbursement, restructuring schools, repurposing and closing schools and buildings, leveraging community talent and expertise, transportation again, repurposing buildings again, multi-generational centers. That could fall under the repurposing of building concept. Streamlining bus routes, that's transportation optimization, and then staff health insurance incentives, which I've got employees who currently are on insurance but really don't need insurance because maybe they're covered by their significant other. And if they don't need insurance and they opt into our free plan, we could save $7,000 for that employee, not pay their health insurance. Could we give them a little bonus, like $1,000? You know, so that was kind of, so very creative ideas, lots of things for us to really look at. So as we look at all of these options, there are some of them on there that are very, I don't want to say controversial, but they do stimulate lots of conversation, right? So you've got people who feel, have an opinion on either side of these. So what we decided that we would do to try to identify a lot of the things that could possibly be, that need to be considered, two of the major ones are a calendar. So we put a focus group together for doing an innovative calendar, and then a facility utilization focus group will start here in the next month or so. We've elicited some experts in that area and are kind of identifying, because there's so much that goes into, I'm going to say the words, closing a school. And if that's what we determine needs to be done based on the research, you make sure that you have done all of your research and you've been very thorough in that. And I know there's some people in this room that have been through a school closing, and it is not a pleasant experience. And so those are going to be difficult conversations that are going to be had over the next year. So, having said that, Superintendent Dolezal, do you have anything you would like to add and offer?
President Busby, members of the board, what I would like to offer is ultimately, I know the quality of education we're going to provide in this district to the kids that come here, and it's going to be good. What that looks like and what we might be able to vision and envision for the future, I don't know that we're there yet. But what I know is whatever heavy lifting and whatever jobs need to get done, this community, this district, has the talent both to figure it out, the ability to figure it out. We can do hard things, we will do hard things, and ultimately we'll do them because it's what's best for kids.
So I would entertain any questions.
I have a couple questions. When you were giving the little laundry list of things that have to happen for next school year, one of them was eliminating positions. The number that you gave, does that include anybody who would be retiring, or is it just?
So thank you, Madam President and members of the board. So we are hoping that the positions that we're going to be reducing because of the decline in student enrollment will be recognized through attrition. So Dr. Henderson, do you want to speak to your mail to the staff today?
Yes, President Busby, board. So we're looking at roughly 14 to 15 positions when you just look at the classroom size. When you look at the ratio of students and you divide it by 26 at the elementary, higher at the junior high and high school, we kind of identify a number, and that's the staffing model for each one of the schools. And so from there, some schools will have, a few of the schools have 1 or 0 staffing positions that they would need to cut. Other schools have 3, 4, 5 that they would need to cut. So when you look at historically from year to year, we usually lose about 50 to 60 teachers just through natural attrition, retirements, them leaving the profession, moving on to another district. And so we've already received several retirements, several resignations, and so we're already reducing that number from 14 to 15 down to maybe 9 that we have. Contracts will be coming out here post spring break. We had to push back that timeline a little bit, and we'll get some continued resignations that way. So we anticipate, based on historically what we've seen, that we'll get to that number through natural attrition. I sent an email to all staff and giving them an update today on the process, the timeline for contracts being sent out, and also with the encouragement, although we don't want them to resign, we want them to continue with us, but the sooner they get those locations, we have a better idea. So if we need to do shifting from one site to another, we can make those changes with the hope of not moving into a RIF process. That's always on the table if we get to everyone wants to return because they love what we're doing here, that we would have to go to that RIF process. But we're confident that we're going to get those cuts through just natural attrition.
Thank you. One other question. The community group that you pulled from, how was that group formed, and, like, what was the cross-section of people involved in it?
Superintendent Dozel.
Madam President, members of the board, we've had a long-standing superintendent's community cadre, so that is the group that I inherited. We also did some invitations. If you recall last year, there was an open invitation to some outside community members that hadn't really been involved. Many of them actually joined that group, again, to get some input. So community members, business owners, retirees, there are teachers on that, there are parents on that as well from every site.
Okay. Very good. Any other questions?
Go ahead.
I'm just on your, Ms. Rodriguez, on your next steps slide, do you have maybe a rough timeline on those two groups when they'll, obviously, sounds like the one group's already kind of started thinking, but maybe the calendar group, if that has gone out for volunteers to be on that, and if someone's going to lead that up and how that all looks like?
I would turn that over to Dr. Jensen.
The calendar committee, or the innovative calendar focus group. So we have a fast plan and a slow plan that we'll be reviewing to decide if that's something that we can, which lift we want to make as a district. And so we'll be reviewing that tomorrow or Thursday, and then forming an action group is what we're going to call it, because this has been a focus group. We've just studying. The next group would be an action group who would actually be doing action. And that group, it depends on if we go with the fast timeline or the slow timeline. So it could be as soon as this week, or it could be as slow as, I would probably start eliciting people who were interested in it in May. And then start actively meeting in August if we go with this slow option.
Thank you.
Back to the budget page of the elimination. I know 15 were out of that, just over 1 million in teachers, but then there was some part of ESS. How many positions makes up that portion, that 320,000? 4.
This is a fun evening. Back in 2009, I was right there in that eliminate ESS positions. I got caught up in that, so it's disappointing to see that that's happening again. Is being recommended because it does put a strain on a lot of things, as does eliminating the teacher positions. I understand all of this, but it's disappointing. There's so many things going on here, and I'm not sure exactly how to speak to all of these, but part of the reason that we're in this position again, and I've beat this horse until it's falling apart here, but our community has turned its back on this district over and over again by not passing the bonds and not passing the overrides, and then subsequently they're taking their kids other places. So it's a really rough thing to do, and then we have to try to figure out how to put this thing together to continue with this really good education we're giving the kids. And then we've got these drastic things about closing a school or this 4-day work week. And, it made me think of these other drastic things that maybe would get some people's attention. you didn't do an override, you didn't do a bond. What would you think about the fact that maybe, I don't know, we'd have to cut transportation? I mean, has that even been considered?
Yes, it has been.
We didn't see that numbers. Would we be able to see that number and we just eliminate it
That's going to be
completely?
part of the future planning that we'll be doing with the repurposing, closing schools, eliminating transportation for middle school and high school, expanding the transportation walk for little ones. There are some things that we have seen other districts do.
Right.
Again, I want to reiterate, as Mr. Bremer said, we are not alone in these decisions.
Right.
We see our adjacent, sister district to our south closing 3 schools. You hear on the news, Mesa eliminating 400 positions. Okay, there have been a number of districts that are losing enrollment similar to what we are, and having these hard conversations. And I appreciate, Jeff, that Member Fortney, that you are saying, that yes, we have been challenged. I've been here when we didn't pass the bond. I was here when we didn't pass the override. We tried our best to educate the community on the importance of those things. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, we are here now. We may come to the governing board in a year or two. Of course, not this year because it's too late to call for an election, really, and plan for that. But, possibly next year we call for an election. One of the things that we do, I feel strongly about, show our community, is be transparent on where we are fiscally, and that we are showing the community we are fiscally responsible with the resources that we have. I heard that over and over and over again. So as we have these they are difficult conversations. They don't feel good at all. But at the end of the day, we need to keep in mind in any decisions that we make and recommendations that we bring to the board that we have done our research on how this impacts kids.
And I appreciate some of the comments that were made during the emails that we received about how when we communicate what we're doing or thinking about doing to the public, giving them that transparency and that early warning, it's still going to upset all sorts of people, but we've had a history just in the last few years of that really not going well. So I appreciate the fact that we are being proactive about this. I don't know. There was a bunch of other things, but I think I'm going to just stop it right there. But thank you for this presentation.
President Busby, if I can chime in real quick to Mr. Fortney's comments. Just to clarify for the record, the elimination of ESS positions, those will not be classroom teaching positions. So it's going to be kind of ancillary service positions that we are eliminating or moving into the IDEA grant in order to free up the M&O. So you won't see a direct impact to students in the classroom there.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson.
Any comments? I appreciate the time, effort, energy that went into putting this presentation together, because I know it took a lot of work by a lot of people. And I really appreciate, and I probably speak for everybody sitting here, the forward thinking that was invested in this, and to really want to look beyond short-term fixes, because I think some of those short-term fixes, from where I'm sitting, there's been a lot of short-term fixes, and I think some of those have kind of helped us get to where we are today. And so I really appreciate the effort to try to make it as good as possible going forward. So thank you. Anything else? Okay. All right. Item 3.3, financial presentation tax credit, presented by Mrs. Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you, members of the board. This is the presentation that I was going to give to you last meeting, but unfortunately I wasn't able to attend. But I'd like to just share some news. Every year we submit a tax credit report to the Department of Revenue, and I want to share that information with the governing board. So extracurricular tax credits, we are held accountable for spending that money in which it was intended and given to us by the donor. So we track that very closely. We have an account code for every category, every athletic program, and we make sure that that money is spent the way that the donor, when they gave it to us, wanted us to spend it. So that report goes out on the 28th. Tomorrow, we submit that report to the Department of Revenue. And just as a reminder, extracurricular tax credit by statute can pay for these things. One of the things that we are hoping would get extended, because it has been invaluable to our district, is the fact that we could use tax credit money for capital items. That has bought lots of furniture at the middle school, upgraded some of the labs at some of our schools, put in a couple of marquees that we couldn't afford because we are very capital poor here. As you know, we transfer $2 million of our $2.4 million that we get in capital to M&O. So $400,000 doesn't go very far. So we are hoping that that might get extended this year. Yes, Superintendent Dozel?
Mrs. Rodriguez, I just wanted to point out to everybody, Senate Bill 1455 is on the floor. It's moved out of the Senate, should be going to the House for their review as well. And that would allow school districts to continue that, so it would not sunset in July of 24. So we are in District 3, if that's something that interests you. Senate Bill 1455 is in particular relevance to this topic.
Thank you, Superintendent Dozel. So we also get contributions to our schools where people will say, you know, I don't really have any preference how you spend it how you need it. And we will put that in a fund in the accounting system called Programs in Need. And they can take that program in need money and then they can use it for whatever extracurricular activity they have a need for on the campus. Now, we have a site council. Every campus has a site council. So these decisions about how this tax credit money is being spent that hasn't been designated is put in front of a council. The principal will have a meeting with their site council, some of them like once a quarter. They'll show them the report. I know they have budget reports that they share with them, and then they have some recommendations on how they think that that money would best be utilized on their campuses. So I really like the community involvement in that part. And then here's what the expenditures look like for the year. So you can see I have on the top, you have your school. On the far left-hand side, you see the activity. So athletics, capital, you can see we spent $234,000 in capital last year. Amazing. That was really able to do some great work. Specifically at the high school, you can see, and the middle school invested some money on their campus as well as the Desert Sun campus. And then you can see character education, clubs, enrichment, field trips, performing arts. Probably the biggest part that we were able to spend money in was athletics. So here's what happens with athletics. We charge $320, something like that, a large amount of money, $325. Thank you. And that money, some people choose to deposit that into tax credit. So you can see athletics is a very high number along with the capital. So this is how we spent the money. Now, if we look at how we spent, $623,000, but look at what we brought in. So we can do a better job at soliciting tax credit revenue. When we are spending more than we're bringing in, that tells you that we had a balance that we needed to spend down. And I work very actively with all of the principals to work on that. These monies are not to be sitting in the bank. They are to be spent on the students when the donations come in. And then here you can kind of see the pattern of donations. So I will tell you part of what happened this year that it went down is because of an accounting change that we made. So what was happening was we were putting all of the athletic fees into tax credit. Once it goes into tax credit, you cannot get a refund. So if your child broke their leg, if you left the school, if something happened and they weren't on the team anymore, we could not refund you the money. Okay? That made a few families not very happy. And so we have now given the option to parents. If you want to use your fees, money, towards your tax credit donation, and mind you, tax credit donation is only $200 for an individual, $400 for a parent, for a couple on your taxes. That's all. So, you have one or two sports, that's already exceeding your $400. So we deposit into another fund we call auxiliary fund. Okay, we put fees in. And so that's why you see that decline. I looked at that because I thought, what's going on? But that's what happened was the transition in the accounting method of the tax credit this last year. People can still donate athletics to that, but they can't get it back. So we just need to be careful.
And Mrs. Rodriguez, I just wanted to clarify really quickly, they can't get it back because they're going to get it back on their taxes. So you can't donate to get it back, but then get a refund of the money that you're getting a refund from the state. So that's the reason, and helping parents understand that can sometimes be tricky. But that's the reasoning behind it.
Correct. Thank you for the clarification. Correct. So, any questions? We do promo. We do tax credit video. We do a mailer to every household in the district. And then we have information on our website. So we will work with our sites to do a better job at getting the word out, because you're right, you get it right back, when you file your taxes. So any questions?
I have a couple questions. For this, I know the amount is similar for charter schools. I'd assume they have to do all the same accounting as far as all the details when they get their tax credit as well at a charter school.
Yes.
But private school is, I think it's up to $2,600 now. So they have that and the ESSER funds they can utilize.
That is correct.
Okay. Just putting that out there.
You took my question.
And we have been working for years to get that amount increased from 400 to be more equivalent to what private schools are able, and they're really tuition organizations that are accepting those tax credit donations, and corporations can donate, and corporations cannot donate to us and get that write-off as far as a tax, direct tax credit write-off. But what we have to be very cognizant of, and what legislators look at, is how much of a balance do you have in your tax credit money fund? If you're not spending what you currently have, why should we increase the amount that people are able to donate to you? Which is why I'm very adamant about we spend the money as it's coming in to show that we really have a need for the money. So that when we go to our legislatures and ask them to increase that amount, I can show them we use every penny of that.
Now, and for that private school donation, since corporations can donate to it as well, is the detail as necessary? Because it can just go towards tuition?
Yes, it
unit
goes
where
to-
ours has to go into specific buckets?
That's correct. So theirs is towards tuition. So really, when you donate money to a private school, most private schools have a tuition organization that they direct people to donate to, as opposed to directly to the school.
Okay. That's it.
On the topic of the private schools, are they accountable, do they have to be accountable to the state to the degree that public schools are?
No, they do not. Not even close. We have a lot of regulations, and you see the detail that we in our accounting, for instance, and how we have to account for every single different fund that we have. So you see that, and this is just an example of. I probably have over, I'd say 200 to 300 account codes alone just for tax credit in my system to make sure we're tracking it accurately.
So, just so I understand, so essentially when money is donated into a private school, it just sort of goes in there and it goes wherever. There's not really an accountability.
Yeah, we don't know
Yeah.
the exact,
So-
what it's spent on, salaries, what's spent on supplies. We
And-
don't
and
have the same reporting that,
They don't have to report that to the state.
no, they do not.
And even with any kind of public funds?
That is correct.
Nice. Okay.
What do you think we need to do to get a state that's more interested in helping public education than private education? Yeah.
That's-
I
Well,
withdraw
that's
my,
kinda
I
off
withdraw my
topic.
question.
Sorry.
That-
I would love
that's
to
a
have that
different
conversation
agenda
with you
item.
offline. Member Fortney.
Yes. Any other questions? Thank you again for bringing this information. Appreciate it. Item 3.4, Trust Model Policy Program, Chapters 3 and 4, presented by Mr. Dolezal.
President Busby, members of the board, if you recall, on October 24th, the board unanimously voted 5-0 to start the process of moving to the Trust Model Policy Program starting July 1st of 2024. That began our work of crosswalking our current policy to the new one. The Trust Model Policy Program is rooted in state and federal law and crafted by Arizona education and litigation attorneys from several law firms around the state. Since we are moving to the policy drafted by the groups of attorneys that know educational litigation best, we feel we're putting our district in our best position to limit our liability moving forward. On February 16th, the board was sent the drafts of Chapters 3 and 4, along with a crosswalk that helped us review our current policy and determine what we needed to keep in our new policies and/or procedures. Chapter 3 policies cover business operations relating primarily to Mrs. Rodriguez and her team, and Chapter 4 policies cover human resources relating primarily to Dr. Hendrickson and his team. Our plan is to bring back Chapters 3 and 4 with any updates to consider or questions answered by our attorneys to the March 26th, 2024 meeting as an action item for approval by roll call vote. With that, we open it up for your feedbacks, thoughts, and/or questions on Chapters 3 and Chapter 4.
Well, that's definitely some good reading. And I do appreciate the fact that we have over a month until we have to approve this. I do want to just, I would kind of like some guidance, I guess, is what I'm looking for, because what I took from our last meeting when we approved Chapters 1 and 2 was we had the experts doing this and we needed to trust the process. And again, I appreciate all the work that Member Brown did to look at those things and go over these things and, ask the questions. But I don't see, my gosh, I don't even remember how many pages these things were. But the time and effort to do that for us would be amazing. And I don't even have a printer that would print that much. So I guess what I'm really wanting to find out is what exactly as board members, are we looking to do here? Because we're trusting the process. That's what you guys are doing. You're going through these crosswalks. You are looking at these things. You're comparing them, and you're bringing them out to us for approval. I don't think we'd want to be going through and doing the same thing that you just did. So any guidance that would focus what I'm going to be doing over the next month would really be helpful for me.
Member Fortney, thank you for your question. I guess I would like to mention first that I'm hoping some of that process goes on for this meeting, so then there are questions, concerns, anything that we can bring forth and take back to our groups, and then also to legal, any types of questions like that. I too encourage all of those things. I know we've all made phone calls, just kind of, what does this mean? We think this is the best thing, looking at those ideas. So again, I think it's looking at the review of the policies, yes, at some level, because if you look at your major functions, policy is one that's really huge, and then that's chapter 1, kind of your governance, and then chapter 2 is your employee. But policy is certainly a big piece. So I do think going through like you've done, and yes, it's painstaking. We have done the work. I think we're pretty good, and I think we're very thorough, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you we're perfect. So again, the more eyes that look at it, the more questions come up. Even if it's just reaffirming, yep, that's what we thought. Okay, yes, we're still doing it. All of that is actually beneficial for us. And again, I think as a new cabinet and leadership team, I think this exercise is invaluable for us to really get to know our policies in and out more so than I had ever known them prior to. So if you're asking me, what do I recommend? I recommend you spend as much time as you can kind of looking for those things and not being afraid to ask questions, because we're not afraid to go get the answers.
Are you seeing things, this could be for both you or Ms. Rodriguez, are you seeing things in this policy crosswalk and comparing and doing things and putting these things together that you are able to streamline, or you are able to get rid of some things? Are you actually able to make some significant changes? Because I'm no more a finance person than I was a lawyer. So I want to, so I'm taking it from the process. So what are you seeing so far?
So what I see in Chapter 3, which is a lot of what governs the work that is done in the finance department, is it is straight out of statute and USFR. So the processes that we currently have in place are just being confirmed that, yes, we have policy and statute to substantiate the work that we're doing. I will tell you, I did not find a lot of fluff in our old policy. It was pretty straightforward in this content area. There were a few things that we did bring over that made it a little clearer in the procedural part of it, and you'll see in that crosswalk that you sent, there's a handful of policy that I took the copyright off of because I brought some of the old current policy into the new. And then having said that, what I try to do, and I want the policy that governs what the finance department does to be very streamlined. What I will ask our staff all the time, if they want to implement something new, to bring me the governing board policy or the USFR requirement or the statute that says we have to do that. For the simple fact of what we just discussed a minute ago, there is already so much red tape in what we have to do. Why are we going to create any more for ourselves? So I appreciate this being very straightforward and taking a lot of the ambiguity out of the current policy that we may have experienced.
Same thing for you, Dr. Henderson?
Yeah, I would agree, Member Fortney, members of the board. For Chapter 4 with Human Resources, where we saw a lot of the streamlining is, for instance, in general leave, a lot of our leave policies. You have general leave, FMLA leave, sick leave, and that was spread into multiple policies, both certified and classified policies, and this streamlined it all into one set of policies. So that's the nice thing. I think for my recommendation as you look at this, a lot of these are, as Mrs. Rodriguez said, are driven by statute. So when you look at mandatory reporting, I was just kind of flipping through some pages. That's driven by statute. That's what we have to do. There's no work around that. When you look at FMLA in here, that's federally driven. So those ones you can kind of go through and go, okay, that's nothing really we can change with it. What I would focus on is the ones that we do have control over. So, for instance, our general leave policy, how we disseminate leave, how do we pay out leave. That was all kind of copied and pasted from current policy. That's embedded in 4302, I believe. There'll be a policy on our evaluation system. So although we're governed by requirements for teacher evaluations and adequate performance, our evaluation, what we consider to be inadequate performance or ineffective, effective, that was developed by our district itself. So looking at those ones. There's some really good new policies in here. If you look at employee conduct, it talks about student-staff boundaries, and it very specifically drills down, and I think it's a 2-page list of clear student-staff boundaries. That in the old policy was kind of just vague with things, but this really give specific examples of things, which I'm really looking forward to, and that's going to be a part of the training for not only new employees moving forward, but annual training for you're going to read all of the student staff boundary expectations. You're going to sign off on those as well. The one change that I did have to make just to, and I'll send you an update, is if you look at policy 4302, which happens to be our general leave policy. There was a portion of it that was in 4302C, which is how we pay out general leave after 10 years, $12 an hour that they get paid. Our attorneys wanted to embed that in the actual policy, not a procedure. So that is just going to be a copy paste from 4302C over to 4302. And I'll send that separate to you guys in an update. But those would be my recommendations, looking at the ones that you know that as you've been here for a while, you know that we've adopted, we've adjusted to make sure that those are still in there. Things that are IBN team has suggested and implemented change, making sure that those are honored in those. In working with our CCEA and our IBN team, the ones that they've notified us that we already knew about, making sure they're over or in here. I've cross-referenced, double-checked that those have been moved over as well. So,
Thank you.
yep.
Any other questions? I have two. And it's just, this is just simply for clarification. In 4-102, it's a policy regarding the staff calendar. And some of the verbiage in there, it says in effect, the governing board may approve. Is that something that, are we required to approve the calendar? Or is that, well, we can, but we don't have to. After the last go-round with last set of policies, that just kind of jumped out at me, and so I was just asking for a little clarification on that.
Yeah, excellent question, President Busby and members of the board. So for each position, we have a work calendar for it. So for instance, all of us are under a 261-day work calendar where we work with payroll to say what are the federal holidays that we build in, what are the winter break policies or dates that we provide off. So we kind of build those. That's not required that you approve those. It's up to you if you want to come down and approve those. But for every level of position, we'll have a different work calendar. So we have a 9-11 month calendar. We have bus drivers have a different calendar because they need additional training days. So we just determine, that department determines when do we need those individuals, how many days before the start of the school year do we need them, might we need them over the breaks where traditionally schools are closed as well. So that's something that we can definitely bring to the board, but it's just taking those days and from each year to year we go, okay, what are the start dates of school, end dates of school, where are all the holidays, and we just kind of start plugging in to fit 261 days into the calendar.
You answered my question. I was just looking for whether or not we were required to, so thank you.
No, you're not. Yep.
My other question is on 4302 about general leave. Our existing policy talks about front-loading some of the leave, and as I'm sure you can appreciate, you're looking at the trust policies and you're looking at our policies and going back and forth. I was getting a little little confused
Cross-eyed?
on which was where. So I just want to make sure that the front loading of the policy, of the leave is also in the
Yes.
trust policy.
President Busby, members of the board, so under 4302 leave, if you go down to certificated professional staff, there's that first bullet, and it states certificated staff will have a total of 96 hours of general leave offered as a benefit of employment each fiscal year. In accordance with the certified master agreement, 48 hours, which will equate to 6 days of general leave, will be front-loaded in the certified staff members' general leave, the first full pay period. Yep.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
Nope.
That's it.
Looking at all those policies in 10 different places and making sure I captured everything.
Yeah, it gets a little hairy, and I appreciate everybody who's had involvement in looking at this, because it's not an easy task. So thank you for your time and efforts. Any other questions? Okay, moving right along. Item 4, action consent. Is there a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, item 4 passes. Item 5, old business, we have none. Item 6, no new business. Item 7, adjournment. Is there a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned, and it is 7:20. Thank you for your time.